Hello parents, this is Math with Miss Owen. I wanted to take a minute and talk to you about how students are doing decimal multiplication in 5th grade, because you'll most likely notice that it's very different from what you learned when you were in 5th grade. I know that it's really different from what I learned. So I'm going to start off by showing you the traditional algorithm and then jump over to the place value method and finish up by talking about fractions. So you can kind of skip to where you feel like you need to be. So the traditional algorithm would go ahead and you would have something like 1 7/10 multiplied by 25 hundredths. And you'd almost ignore that decimal point and then you would go ahead and multiply. So multiply here and then multiply across and then put my placeholder for 1 and then 3, go ahead and add. Alright, so then once I get my product, look back and count how many place values or digits were behind the 0, or behind the decimal point. So you have 1 here, 2, 3, so my decimal point goes from 1 to 3. Does that sound familiar, maybe? So 5th graders aren't going to be learning this strategy. They're going to be looking at a more targeted approach, really understanding why it's 425 thousandths as opposed to just being able to count the digits behind the decimal. So the first method that I'm going to demonstrate is the place value method, where I take my 1 7/10 and I'm going to rename it as my very last place value digit. So my last number in 1 7/10 is in the 10th place, so I'm going to rename it as tenths. So it's 17 tenths. And this may sound like a different language to you, but I promise your students know what I'm talking about. Here, my last digit is in the hundredths place, so I'm going to rename it as hundredths. So I have 25 hundredths. And then from here, and again, I'm just showing, I don't have to do both of these. These are just two different ways to denote tenths or hundredths. So go ahead and multiply again. I'm going to get 425. When I multiply my tenth times my hundredth, I would get 1,000th. And that's my place value. Okay, so then I can come over to my place value chart. Some students are able to kind of do this in their head. Some kind of need to see it visually. So I have my tenths, my hundredths, my thousandths. And since this is 1,000th, I'm going to go ahead and put that 425 in this column. But since this column can't have a digit more than over 9, because then I have to regroup, my 42 would come over here, and then again my 4 would come over here, so I would end up with 425 thousandths. Okay, so that's one method. The other method is, that seems to be the most popular, is the fraction method, because students just learned how to multiply fractions, so this is what they're familiar with right now. So you have 1 7/10, you can just write that as a fraction, and then 25 hundredths. Okay, if you have a mixed number like this, students find it to be easier to go ahead and rename this as an improper fraction. Otherwise, you'd have to do the distributive property, in which case you'd have to multiply the 1 times 25 hundredths and 7/10 times 25 hundredths and add them together, and that can just get laborious. So 1 7/10 can just be renamed as 17 tenths. You'll notice it again, 17 tenths times 25 hundredths. Again, 25 hundredths, and then you can just multiply it across. So you're going to get 425 over 1,000, and then that can give you your answer of 425 thousandths. So those are two different ways to multiply those fractions. I know it's a lot all at once, and it's kind of a longer video, so if you've got questions, please let me know. Otherwise, good luck.